They called him a god. But what he did with that power would turn Rome into a theater of madness. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, known to history as Caligula. To some, he was a misunderstood visionary. To most, he was the darkest face of absolute power, a ruler whose desires knew no limits, whose cruelty disguised itself as divinity. For 4 years, the city that ruled the world became his private stage, and its people became unwilling actors in his play of corruption, lust, and terror. When Caligula rose to power in 37 CE, Rome rejoiced. He was the beloved son of the heroic general Germanicus, the blood of Augustus, the descendant of the gods. The Senate welcomed him as a savior after the paranoid tyranny of Tiberius. At first, he played the part well. He granted amnesty to prisoners, restored public games, and showered the people with gifts. For a brief moment, Rome believed it had found a just emperor. But within months, the mask began to slip. Historians say it began with illness, a sudden fever that brought him close to death. When he recovered, the man who returned was not the same. The gentle prince was gone. In his place stood a creature driven by appetites so extreme they defied comprehension. Some said the gods had touched his mind. Others whispered that he had become a god himself. Caligula's palace soon became a maze of secrets. Behind its golden doors, the emperor built a world where pleasure was law and morality was treason. He invited Rome's most beautiful women and men to his feasts, where wine flowed like rivers and inhibitions vanished under the shadow of his power. But these were not feasts of love. They were performances of domination. Every act served one purpose: to remind Rome that its emperor owned not only their bodies, but their dignity. The first of his atrocities was committed against those who once loved him. Caligula's own sisters Drusilla, Agrippina, and Julia Livilla became pawns in his perverse fantasies. Drusilla, the eldest, was said to be his favorite. He paraded her before the court, sat her beside him during meetings, even demanded she be worshipped as a goddess. When she died unexpectedly, Caligula's grief turned into obsession. He ordered her deified and mourned her as the new Venus. Some whispered that their bond had long crossed the line between brother and sister. Whether true or not, the rumor alone shocked Rome to its core. For in a society built on honor and lineage, nothing was more sacred than the purity of one's blood. The second horror unfolded within the very heart of Rome, the imperial palace. Caligula would invite senators and noblemen to lavish banquets, only to turn their wives into playthings before their eyes. He would summon a man's spouse to his chambers, defile her, and then return to boast about her performance as if it were a political debate. The Senate dared not speak. To object was to die. To stay silent was to become complicit. Rome's elite, once proud and untouchable, found themselves humiliated, reduced to trembling spectators of their emperor's depravity. The third atrocity was one of blasphemy, a calculated assault on the gods themselves. Caligula declared that if Jupiter ruled the heavens, then he, Caligula, ruled the earth. Temples once dedicated to ancient deities were stripped and rededicated in his name. He ordered statues of the gods be modified with his own likeness. The priests obeyed. The people watched in disbelief. And when a high priest hesitated, Caligula forced him to participate in acts that defiled the sacred rites not out of desire, but to prove that divine law bowed before imperial will. The fourth act of cruelty came not from lust, but from mockery. Caligula loved to watch the boundaries of shame collapse. He opened what historians later called the House of the Divine Brides, a section of his palace turned into a brothel. But this was no ordinary brothel. It was staffed by the wives and daughters of Rome's most respected men, forced to serve the emperor's guests while he watched from behind a curtain. Coins paid to these women were collected not for greed but for humiliation. Caligula claimed it was a lesson that all Romans, from senators to slaves, were equally subject to his pleasure. The fifth, and perhaps most chilling atrocity, came when power itself became his lover. Caligula's desire was no longer for flesh but for fear. He staged public spectacles where captives were stripped, abused, and executed for amusement. He chose victims not for their crimes, but for their beauty. Some accounts tell of nights where he would select a man or woman from the crowd, bring them to his chambers, and after satisfying his whims, have them thrown to the beasts the next morning. Each act fed his illusion that he was untouchable, that his will was the only truth left in Rome. And yet, even in the midst of this nightmare, there were moments when the mask cracked. Those close to him claimed he often muttered to himself, as if haunted by voices only he could hear. He would talk to the moon, command the sea, and laugh at invisible enemies. Whether madness or guilt, no one knew. But one thing was certain: the emperor who once promised Rome salvation had become its curse. Rome began to rot from within. Senators plotted in silence, soldiers whispered behind closed doors, and the people prayed for deliverance. But fear is a strange thing. It binds as tightly as it breaks. For every man who hated Caligula, there were 10 who bowed before him out of terror. Then, in 41 CE, the inevitable happened. A small group of guards, led by the tribune Cassius Chaerea, decided to end the nightmare. They cornered Caligula in a passage beneath the theater and struck him down. The god who demanded worship fell bleeding like any mortal man. The empire trembled, not in mourning, but in relief. When news of his death spread, the people did not cry. The Senate erased his decrees, the temples reclaimed their gods, and the palace was scrubbed clean of his presence. But the stain of his reign remained a reminder of how icily devotion turns to fear, and how power without restraint becomes disease. Historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio recorded his life with both fascination and disgust. Some accused them of exaggeration, others of moralizing. Yet even stripped of rumor, Caligula's story stands as one of history's most haunting lessons: that the line between God and monster is thinner than we think. Centuries later, artists and writers would retell his tale, sometimes as tragedy, sometimes as horror. But behind every retelling lies the same question: was Caligula born a monster, or did Rome create him? The empire that worshipped power, that adored spectacle, that cheered for blood, perhaps it merely got the ruler it deserved. In the ruins of the Palatine Hill, where his palace once gleamed, tourists now walk among broken marble and silent columns. The gold is gone. The laughter has faded. But if you listen closely, the wind still carries echoes of those lost voices, the whispers of those who served, suffered, and survived under the reign of a man who thought himself divine. Caligula's Rome was not just an empire of stone and conquest. It was a mirror showing humanity its most dangerous truth: that beneath the crown, beneath the robes of glory, power reveals what the soul truly is. And sometimes what it reveals is terrifying, because history remembers emperors for their victories. But Caligula is remembered for something else: the warning he left behind. A warning written not in marble, but in the broken hearts of those who lived through his madness. Asterisk.